Now, for our top story this hour, conservative think tank is calling for the introduction of a minimum income, saying the welfare system is not providing enough support for people. Bright Blue, which calls itself an independent think tank for liberal conservatism and is backed by some senior Tory MPs, says that households need a minimum income to meet the cost of living. The government is currently considering options to reform the welfare system to encourage more people back into employment, while Labour has outlined plans to reform the system should it win power. Nick Tyrone, journalist and author, who's an associate fellow at Bright Blue, joins me now. Nick, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Nick, what does the research tell us? What does the report say?
Well, it comes up with 3 recommendations, and 2 of which I'm very much in favour of. One is around a social security digital platform for all universal credit claimants. I think this is a good one. Basically, it's about trying to just, without getting too technical, it's about using technology to improve the system in ways that I think are entirely reasonable and actually intuitive. Then there's the idea of creating a sort of higher level contribution element in UC, which I think is really good as well. I think that's a great idea.
So explain that to us. The universal credit, a higher level contribution. What would that mean?
So it would mean if people had paid more in, let's say through taxation, national insurance over the years, they'd be able to sort of get some of that back. So it's sort of putting in an extra layer of sort of contributory layer to it. So if someone loses their job, they'd probably they would in theory be able to get a sort of a higher level of benefit, basically based on their past contribution.
And am I right in thinking, reading around the report, that this part of the recommendation is, for example, middle and higher income families being able to voluntarily contribute a little bit more. So if the breadwinner or both the breadwinners of a family lose their jobs, they get a little bit more money from universal credit than they would be entitled to.
Under the current scheme, yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. And you were going to tell us another suggestion from the report.
Well, the other suggestion is minimum income, which I'm going to be honest and say I'm less keen on. The reason being is, there are differences between what they're proposing, what the report's proposing, and universal basic income, but there's kind of an overlap, and I'm not really for universal basic income for a variety of reasons.
Why? Let's touch on that, because it's something that I've spoken about quite a lot on this show, and I've always thought that it kind of made a lot of sense to have a universal basic income. But you're not talking about exactly the universal basic income where everybody gets the same amount of money. We're talking about, should you need the support, the universal credit or whatever body it is that's looking after it, to make sure that the income you're getting when you're getting it from the government is enough to live on. Why would you not support that?
Why would I not support that? That's a very good question. I think part of the problem is I think what you end up getting with some of these systems is the money doesn't really quite go to the right places. And what you end up is people who don't particularly need it getting benefit, and people who desperately need it not getting quite the level that they require. So here's the thing, looking at the Bright Blue report, it's sort of trying to finesse universal basic income, in my opinion. So it's sort of trying to say, well, we'll have bandwidths, we'll have checks, we'll have this. The problem is, as soon as you introduce complexity into it, there's sort of kind of no point, because the point of having something like a minimum income is, well, just it's about simplicity. Everybody gets this. The problem being is that as soon as you do that, what the report is very aware of is the sort of the faults in universal basic income, which is that you can end up with a sort of a bloke who's 55, who's very asset rich, who's getting whatever the amount is from the government, 12K, to not work, for instance. And then maybe somebody who has a range of disabilities who really needs a lot more support is sort of just getting, they're getting the minimum. That's sort of a worst case scenario, obviously, but that's something that I think you can get with these sorts of systems. I'm not saying that that's what Bright Blue report's suggesting, by the way. I'm just saying that that's a danger that something like this could present.
In your view, how do we make sure that people who need help get the help that they need and don't get left in the lurch, as you just described, where some people do not qualify for the amount of money they actually need to keep a roof over their head and food on the table.
I think there's kind of no way to simplify it. I think the basic idea behind universal credit is a good one. But I think it's probably as much as you could ever simplify the system. The fact of the matter is just everything has to be done on a case-by-case basis. And I realize that that's time-consuming and that's expensive, etc. But I think you gotta do it. I just think I'm very suspicious of any sort of one-size-fits-all solution to welfare and benefits. I think they're just rife with problems. And again, people are going to be left in the lurch.
Do you think that we are, let's say, more likely to be able to handle a case-by-case basis? You say it is time-consuming, and you're right, but we're seeing, for example, taxes becoming digital. Self-employed people like myself are now having to do everything through the government gateway. Is that still going to be an excuse that, well, it has to be done on case-by-case basis, when actually the HMRC probably know more about us now than they ever did before, because everything is going digital?
Yes, I guess one of the problems is that there's other layers to this other than income. So, for instance, assets.
Yeah.
How are we taking that into account? Like I said, the 55-year-old bloke who owns the house outright that's worth 2 million quid, let's say, doesn't particularly, let's be honest, it's not someone who desperately needs 12 grand from the government every year or whatever it might be. And we could use that resource better, but how are you going to get to the bottom of that? And I guess it comes back to I just think there's only so simple you can make the system. Obviously, you want to make it as simple as you can do. I just think that I'm very squeamish about things like minimum incomes, UBI. I just think it oversimplifies something that to a point that is detrimental.
Okay. Nick, thanks as ever for spending time with us. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Nick Tyrone there, journalist and author who's an associate fellow at Bright Blue, who have released their report into a minimum income.